All right, everyone. Welcome to the Wednesday, July 12th occurrence of Istio Workgroup Meeting. First on the agenda, I believe, Keith, you called this one out, so that the Istio project has officially graduated from CNCF. Awesome. Thanks to Craig, who did a lot of work working with the Linux Foundation to get us over the finishing line here. And I'm working with a few community members to transfer the test projects from the Google account officially over to CNCF as part of the transfer effort. So for those of you who are not familiar, a lot of the community-owned assets, when we started, it's all owned by Google, and over the last several months, I've been working with folks to transfer them over gradually to CNCF. For example, the istio.io and istio.community domain are now owned by CNCF already. And the test project is one of the last things left. And I'm working mostly with Stuart to get this done. It's slowly but surely, we're making that happen. Okay, so second topic, I believe, is something that Lynn brought up, but she's traveling today. It's John's issue. Let me ping him really quick. See if he can
I'm here.
Oh, there we are. Okay.
What's my issue, though? I don't.
This guy here.
Oh, I think someone added this on my behalf, but I'm happy to talk about it. I think Lynn probably
Right. So Lynn added. So actually, Greg, can you speak to this?
Yeah, sure. So Lynn added this. I know there's still kind of some ongoing discussion there in the issue itself, but I think Lynn was hoping that we could kind of reach, I guess, a consensus on a potential implementation for this. In her latest comment, she called out 3 different options for how this could be achieved using proxy config as the current PR proposes, mesh config, or a gateway API, with her showing some preference to the proxy config. And I was just wondering, well, I guess, John, did you have any other additional thoughts on this topic?
No, I mean, my opinion hasn't changed. Obviously, I've been trying to push this since February of 2022.
All right.
So I don't have anything more to say, but it's probably more the people that are have concerns with it that should respond.
Yeah, I know what Kuat had the biggest concerns with it right now, I guess. Was there anyone else? I don't think Kuat's on the call today, is he?
He just joined.
Okay.
Yeah, I also had some concerns with it, and I'm not sure. I mean, I don't care necessarily where it is added. I'm probably okay with all options, but what exactly is the level of granularity of the APIs, I think is very important, and how it fits with in cases we don't have employee. That's my concern. And, you know, when we integrate with other vendors and so forth. And we can probably start with a minimal API that has just a, you know, doesn't have so many. I don't know what is the last version. John, did you change?
I mean, there's a few things. There's basically for each header that we inject, there's an option to turn it off.
Yeah, and I think that's a big granularity, because that most of headers are implementation details, and I think what made the point that they are related to features that will be turned on and off is not actually header injection that you are. If you remove the, you know, the metadata exchange header, you are not removing a header, you are removing the telemetry feature actually. And from support perspective, if people start using these APIs, support will be almost impossible, because telemetry will be gone and they will not know why it's gone. So,
yeah, that one. Sorry, I misspoke when I said all the headers. That is the one exception. There is no option for remove metadata exchange for that reason. All the other ones are optional, and they don't really break features. Like it's XFCC, it doesn't break authorization policy. It may break their application if they depend on it, but.
But there's still, I mean, there's still, you know, Envoy specific headers that are, I mean, do they connect to a feature? I mean, should we talk with users in terms of low-level Envoy headers, or should we talk with users in terms of features that are behind those headers?
In my experience, the users do not care about that whatsoever. They just want to turn off all the garbage after their request. So this is the provided way to do that. Now, I wish we just never put them there in the first place, and then it's a bit of a different story. But at this point, we need a way to kind of undo or past mistakes, in my mind. If we
I completely agree.
Default and then added them on as part of authorization policy, like enable XFCC as part of authorization policy or something along those lines, to me, that's a different story. But I feel like we have an original sin that we need to kind of correct. Like, yeah,
No,
I don't
completely,
on every virtual service and say turn off the retry header or whatever it's called.
can we add a single option initially that is, you know, just disable all special headers and make it default in waypoints and ambient, where we can fix our sins, and then if necessary to add them, explicitly add them as part of features?
That's potentially an option. Yeah. I mean, that was my actual original goal. Was at the very least I wanted this, well, one, to merge because I think a lot of current users want this, and once this merges on ambient, set all these off by default. So, because we've, you know, wanted to kind of have a smaller feature set and opt in. We could do just Boolean. It's possible.
I mean, at least users will not be exposed to Envoy headers, and you know, we keep the API clean and independent of Envoy and more forward-looking with a gateway API. But we would not expect users to have a gateway API, a Kubernetes gateway API, where they list all the headers from Envoy, all the headers from Nginx, all the headers from AG proxy, just to make sure they are excluded or included.
Can I add that? I think I agree with the use case. I think we do need to do something. My concern is about how it's structured. And I think it still remains actually, because I don't think having an exhaustive none of all headers is the right API service. It doesn't capture everything at all, and what it captures is confusing because things will be affected, should not be affected, simply by not specifying a value in some enum. Very surprising if you like. What I think we can do is split each function into a separate config, and then make that particular config like a default and apply. For example, I see we have retry headers, but where do we say that we have three retries to begin with? Right? I mean, where is it? Why should it be in the same place that we specify three retries? And second thing is I see server gateway, but I don't think people really care about server gateways within the mesh. They care about server header on gateways. So we need to be more restricted about each header and the way it should be used based on the use case, not just a list of random headers that people have no idea what to do.
I don't really agree with that. We've gotten a lot of user feedback on this issue where people have mentioned that it's not just gateways they want to configure this, but for all traffic. And this is proxy config, so they can choose to apply it to gateway only if they want, but they could also choose to apply it to all sidecars or any mix, right?
Well, I have a lot of data that supports it. It is most of data. People really care about server header and gateways, and they want it to be actual value to be propagated.
Sure, but we also have multiple people on this issue specifically saying, I need to remove the server header for east-west traffic. So whether it's 10% or 20 or 30 or 40, I don't know that that's like a useful debate. Like, do we want to stop people from overriding it on sidecars? To me,
do we have Envoy filters that, I mean, evidence that Envoy filters are used for removing it from sidecars today, and
yes,
how much it is? Because, okay, then I think, and besides, sidecars are gone in ambient anyway, so I don't think we should debate too much if sidecars or not sidecars. Waypoints maybe, but what are you okay with you know, just one option to turn off all special headers and then add anything as part of, and of course off by default on by default, I mean disable by default in ambient, and then add anything as part of specific features? Because I completely agree with you that it should be high level, not low level.
Oh, the API is just not, it's a stylistic option of API. Having one even value for everything is just not gonna, it's not feature proof.
No, I'm saying to just remove the enumerator and just have an option, remove special headers on in ambient, off in Istio, and then if we want to enable anything, that will be part of a feature, as you say.
If you add such a value, saying remove special header, then the expectation is that method exchange headers also remove. You're gonna have issues saying why is it not removed?
Except of course, when needed. I mean,
I feel like the first thing we're going to get if we merge that is someone saying, look, I just don't want this X Envoy temp header, but I need XFCC. Why is this a Boolean? I need more granularity.
I'm sure for anything we'll find some users that want it, but the question is what do we want to support long-term and what is the right thing long-term in context of not having an Envoy only implementation and the standard APIs with other vendors and ambient other things, not what users necessarily want short-term. They have Envoy filters still.
I don't think that it's fair to say that we can't have. We will always have Envoy specific APIs, but they can be like Envoy filter is obviously an Envoy API, right? It's fine, I think, to have an Envoy specific API as long as it's clear that it's only for Envoy and configures Envoy specific things, right? Like if Envoy is adding a special Envoy header, then I don't see a way to get around making an Envoy specific API, right? If it's something like XFCC, I agree, that shouldn't be something Envoy specific because that's kind of generalized, even though I think Envoy made it up. But like, there's no way to make an Envoy specific header not tied to Envoy, I feel like.
I mean, HTTP route has the ability to manipulate headers already, so that's not really something that it's a major gap.
It does not have a way to insert these types of headers, though. It has a way to insert static values. You can't somehow generate the X Envoy temp count as a header.
It's not just that. Like the request ID. I mean, this is not even Envoy. This is open telemetry.
Right, I didn't say all of them are Envoy specific headers. About half of them are Envoy specific, and half of them are kind of standards. So, but that was addressing Costin's concern about Envoy specific APIs. I don't think it's a fair criticism.
Sorry, John, I didn't necessarily mean Envoy specific only. I mean low level, set this header or not set this header versus enable this feature or disable this feature. I think APIs should be higher level and as a user of this API, I should not need to know that when I use it and I use it in HTTP route or with a Gamma API, with a gateway API, that, maybe the implementation is Envoy, maybe implementation Nginx, what headers is used by one or what headers are used by the other. It's too low level. That's a problem.
Okay, can you give me a concrete example of what you would want the API to be? It's really not.
First, off all the headers, a single Boolean in this PR, and then special PRs for each feature that would be on and off with term telemetry off is a perfect example. I don't know what other are. What do you have others?
Yeah, I mean, even having like just message for every value, so there's none, and then making default be unset. And then on the default Istio for batch compatibility, we specify in detail what each one of them is doing today. That's much more future-proof because the evolution is simply to turn it off eventually, or add more options. Because even if XFCC is a lot of options there, it depends what you put in this header. It's not just like one Boolean saying yes or no. I might want other things from the certificate.
Yeah, I feel like if I agree with what you're saying, Quad, I'm very happy to make that change, which I believe I'm interpreting as instead of an enum, a bunch of messages so that it's future-proof to not just on or off, and it's not tied to a list. It sounds like Costin, though, is saying that these shouldn't be in proxy config, but instead should be in HTTP route and authorization policy and telemetry API. Am I understanding correctly?
Not necessarily, but John, I'm okay with having it in proxy config for now. That's fine.
You have to go over each one, but for example, request ID, I don't think we should. I'm not sure why we have the option to turn of if you have tracing net. Because things are gonna go bad if you have tracing it, but then there's no request label. So we need to be more careful about allowing things like that to break other features. I'm also not sure why we have a feature here if it is not tracing anymore. Maybe better solution to not enable or there's no tracing. And if tracing, keep it on, it's implicit.
Keith, I think you should probably go now.
Yeah. Was there a design doc for this API?
No.
So it sounds like at this point we're the discussion's focusing around API, backward compatibility, future proofing. Maybe a design doc for the API would be the best place to start, even if it is retroactive, because I think it might help to tease out some of these specifics. Yes, no, maybe.
How about in as part of the upstream gateway API? Because it will be good to get feedback from other vendors that implements the API and see how it will fit in. I mean, if there is interest and get more broad feedback.
I mean, there's no reason why we, as part of the Istio community, can't come to Gateway API with a proposal based on our needs. I don't even know if it's decided necessarily that Gateway API is the best place for this. Again, because it just depends. Like we're saying, do you want to make this project specific? Is this just a general header removal API? I don't know if those questions have been answered definitively yet based on the discussion that was just had.
Kit, I think that's the whole discussion here. If it's just a header removal API and voice specific header removal API, specific to Istio, or it's about user expressing high level security telemetry intent. Because if it's a header specific, then the question is how are we going to support people who use telemetry security and that interface with these headers, and how do you explain to users, what are the headers and they may change in the future. We are kind of tying ourselves into low level decisions.
Right, and I don't disagree that we haven't answered the thing. That's why I'm suggesting a doc, right? So that we can call out, it can be proposal for what the author proposes Istio should implement, whether that's go to Gateway API or do something just within Istio, and we can, have the discussions with alternatives considered. Maybe the alternatives considered would be better for our use cases. Maybe we have a multi-phase approach, but there's just a lot of context that was just, a lot of different good points that were brought up in the previous discussion. And what I would hate to happen is for us to come back in 2 weeks and have the same exact conversation because the decisions and the concerns aren't being captured anywhere.
No, okay, I agree with you. I mean, a document will be perfect. The question is a document about low-level Envoy APIs or a document about common Kubernetes gateway style high-level APIs. And maybe 2 docs is the right answer. I mean, maybe we should consider 2 approaches, one low-level and one high-level.
I mean, in my opinion, a good design doc addresses a problem. And so, again, number of docs I think is implementation detail based on length. But effectively, what I think I'm asking for at this point is a document that takes the issue and talks about the general problem space with customer use cases, and then enumerates possible approaches for solving that problem.
Sorry, I didn't mean. I also wanted to recommend to split it into individual use case because it's sort of too many things in one API. So if you split into messages, you can also start doing it one by one, and that might be easier to discuss. But some concerns that apply to one of the headers, some of the headers don't really apply to other headers, and it's all mixed up.
Yeah, it's very hard to discuss because there are so many use cases mixed into one single API. Like it's a kind of Envoy filter where you can do anything, and 5 different areas: security, telemetry, and others impacted. But one document or other doesn't matter. I think we have pretty much. Anyone disagree with the need to have a design doc? I don't think so.
So who's writing the doc?
Seems like that's me, unless someone wants to volunteer. But it's my PR, then it's probably my doc as well.
Thanks, John.
But I still think it may be useful to do a quick PR. I mean, a simple PR that doesn't necessarily, which is to, in ambient, to basically have the on-off global on-off by default, and then we have more time and we can focus on different features, maybe not necessarily in a single document or a single person. Telemetry could be handled by someone, security by someone else, because each of them is pretty important. And may have different solutions, not one solution that fits all.
Yeah, I mean, there's also follow-up work. If you're gonna disable request attempt header, then you need to substitute. It's gonna be hard to debug. Retries.
So all in favor of the quick PR?
John, what do you think? I mean, that's your.
Oh, you mean a single Boolean? I don't want to do that. I don't think that's useful, really. We don't even need a Boolean if it's just to say ambient never has the headers, and we can just hard code that if ambient internally.
No, but for a regular Istio to have the same, if we decided it was a mistake to add all the headers on by default, and ambient will not have them on by default, we should have something in classic Istio that matches the behavior of ambient. So user can have what we think is the right thing, the right default. So basically fix the default option for Istio classic, and it will be automatic in ambient.
Yeah, I don't know. I don't love it. I'd rather go with the design doc. I think it was a mistake to have all the headers, but I don't know that each header was a mistake, if that makes sense. So I don't know that the correct, if we have to pick one option, is to remove all the headers. It's probably too much. Probably request ID is a nice one to have. Whereas changing server was probably not a good one, but that's also just my opinion. So I don't know that we can confidently have a Boolean that is useful, is kind of my thought.
How about a document where we identify the headers that should be on by default? Basically, what our mistake was, we added all of them. Let's say identify what was the ones that we want in ambient and in future that are required, and the Boolean will be clean behavior versus all of them. I mean, the work is to identify which one should be on by default and to do it ourselves, not let the users do it.
But let's make sure that we're not letting one mistake cause us to make another mistake. And that's probably the biggest reason why I personally be against a PR at this point without a doc. Just because adding a bunch of headers was a mistake, we can still be making mistakes when it comes to how we remediate that. So I think a doc that goes into the nuance of this and proposes a solution would be a general solution would be preferable in my opinion.
No, I agree, Kit. I was just trying to reduce the scope of the document instead of addressing all the features and other things. Just the document to be about what are the right headers to forward by default and cleaning up ambient and matching.
Okay, so I think that so far all I've heard is the consensus we need a design doc and John will draft it.
And just to verify, that design doc will cover, I guess, ambient and non-ambient implementations, solutions.
At this point, all the design docs should cover ambient. I don't think we can afford to have all these the only design docs.
Yeah, I don't think ambient actually. The only thing ambient really impacts for this, as far as I know, is that it's a chance for us to make breaking changes. So we can change the defaults, but I think all the headers, if it wasn't for that, I wouldn't really see them as anything different.
John, do you have a timeline for the draft? Rough.
I don't know. No, I don't. I'll just say no. Probably by next week seems reasonable.
Oh, I was going to say like 2-4 weeks. But
Oh no, it'll be a small doc. It shouldn't be that.
Okay.
Yeah.
Greg?
Yeah, did we have a plan on, I guess, how exactly we're going to determine which headers yes, no should be on by default versus not? Is that just going to be in the design doc, or are we asking specific groups or customers, or what's the plan for that?
No change for sidecars. We can't change the default really. So we can debate for ambient what the default is, but we
Gotcha.
can write in the doc.
I think the intent is to have the document to what is the correct thing to do for ambient, of course, and some way to make the sidecar and gateway do this.
Okay, time check on this one. So anything else on this topic before we move on to the next one? Okay, let's go to the next one. So whose topic is this?
I did it.
All right.
Yeah, so this is a very small proposal to promote proxy protocol to be a API rather than envoy filter. Not sure why it's closed, but oh, is it open? Okay, yeah. Yeah, so it's very simple. Essentially, we want a Boolean saying to enable proxy protocol on gateways. And the reason being is that proxy is a supported feature in lots of cloud infrastructures. In GCP, you can enable proxy protocol on TCP load balancers, on the AWS, as far as I know, probably on Azure. And right now, the only way to support that in Istio is to use envoy filter, which is highly undesirable in terms of support. So this is simply adding a Boolean to existing API to do the same thing. And the reason why we chose proxy config is because there is already a field there to control X-forwarded for, which has a very similar use case. So it makes sense to keep them together. And in fact, that's how we document it in our Istio guides, is to enable X-forwarded for, you change proxy config. So it was a very consistent story. There was a couple of comments I can iterate that Kostin brought up.
Nothing blocking, quite nothing blocking. I mean, they are kind of future looking and just not. I'm not trying to block it or I mean, I'm perfectly okay with the API if it's a Boolean.
Yeah, it's a very narrow scope that's specifically made to be very specific about just proxy config on gateways and nothing more ambitious.
If John or Kit can comment on how it will apply to, because that's, I think, the main discussion. It's not necessarily blocking the API, it's just trying to figure out how Kit is, who is adding target ref or had a proposal to our target ref, would interoperate with this change. I mean, how do we attach this proxy config to the new API? But it's a question, not trying to block it.
Yeah, it's a good question. I would say so. At the very least, I think proxy config, that's the CRD. Well, proxy config, the CRD actually doesn't have this field. This is adding it to proxy config, the part within mesh config, which is very confusing. So this would never actually really get a target ref. Hypothetically, if it was in the proxy config CRD, which we could move it there, right? That was supposed to be the kind of stable stuff that's promoted. So in theory, this could be promoted there. I think at the very least, we will have all of the things that currently have workload selectors allow target ref to gateway. What isn't yet clear is whether we'll allow different attachments, which could be listeners or routes. So I think the thing that would be useful here would be attaching to a specific listener, which probably makes sense for this field, but doesn't necessarily make sense for the rest of proxy config, which has things like image. And like you can't run a different image for a different listener, right? So I don't know. I guess it's somewhat open. Does that answer your question?
It not only answer a question, it adds another question. So I was expecting that it's in the CRD as well. I mean, I didn't realize we have a different proto for the CRD versus proxy config itself.
Yeah, I remember we wanted to not put a bunch of junk in a beta CRD, so we created a small subset.
But shouldn't this go to the small subset, because that's kind of a feature that probably meets the criteria of having a proper API and not an alpha API?
I mean,
Maybe.
realistically, there are lots of things in mesh config today that should probably have moved to proxy config by now. This feels like it feels beta, but I think that one of the open questions I see from the PR is around use cases. Maybe I missed where it got resolved, but it seems like there's a question over, is this gateway only, or can this actually apply to sidecars? Was that resolved?
I don't think it's critical. I don't think it's a critical question. I mean, it's we can decide what we apply it later with implementation.
Yeah, I mean,
Okay.
I can add that there's actual use case. Like, it's not, we do want it for gateways, but I have never heard anyone asking for sidecars.
We can postpone this discussion. I think use cases are expressed where start to have plenty of users using it with envoy filter. So it's more a promotion from alpha to beta in this case.
So this already exists. So
It's used.
exists as an envoy filter, and we're trying to move it to proxy config. Okay. In that case, it feels like a annotation makes the most sense for now, rather than going to proxy config. But that's a very loose opinion on my part.
But Kit, we want to promote alpha APIs to beta and proper CRDs, not to move from alpha to annotations.
Is it an alpha? Well, go ahead, John. You've got your hand up.
A few comments. I think one, we already have the larger field gateway topology, and this is adding another field to it. Whether we promote gateway topology to the CRD, I think is kind of orthogonal to whether we add more fields to it, in my mind. I wouldn't want to. I mean, it's good that we brought up this discussion. I think it's valid. To me, it should be decoupled from this. And then what was the other question? Oh, whether it's alpha or not. I don't know. I'd much prefer people using this structured, well-typed proto buff that's well tested and very scoped than envoy filter. Even if we both claim that they're alpha level, I don't really care about the label. This is clearly an improvement, right? And it has a clear path to going to more stable levels, which is if we move the gateway topology field to proxy config or somewhere else. So in my mind, this is an improvement and worth doing.
But maybe we should do it proper in the CRT.
Yeah, but I don't know. In my mind, like we have the vehicle for it, gateway topology. Like, do we want to go straight from nothing to beta? Why not go to the current undefined proxy config, give some feedback, implement it, and then promote it all together? Or go promote. I mean, we have another PR in parallel that promotes gateway topology to proxy config potentially, but I don't think it needs to block this proxy protocol. Like, I don't see why proxy protocol, which is a small field within a larger field, should care about the whole thing, right? It seems decoupled to me.
Yeah, no, I mean, I agree with you. We can still merge this PR into the alpha proxy config annotation and in mesh config. But both of the entire gateway topology, I mean, it's been around for 3 releases. Don't we want to promote or kill features that
Yeah.
It's critical. I mean, you cannot use Istio with an infrastructure without those gateway topology and without proxy, the proxy protocol. I mean, it's simply not possible.
Oh, one thing I forgot, by the way, is that I think we have some conversion between the config map and the CRD. So even if we went to the CRD, it would have to go in the config map as well. Not contradicting anything you just said, just something I remembered. So no matter what we do, we'll have to do this. We just may also have to put it in the real CRD. I think in my mind, which is why there's some difference, is that I don't view the proxy config or mesh config as such a bad thing. So it's a perfectly fine API.
All right, so conclusion. Approved. John, you have your hand up.
Sorry, the hand's old. I guess when I'm in the room, it doesn't go down on its own. Anyhow, I'm perfectly fine with it. I can approve it. The only reason I hadn't clicked the approve button yet was it sounded like Austin had some open comments, so I didn't want to preemptively merge it. So if I will put my approval if Costin wants to move forward with this.
No, definitely want to move forward. Yeah, absolutely. Move forward, but we should follow up with, what do we do in the gateway API? Because
yeah,
I don't think it's the right way to do it in the context of the new API to put annotations and the current hack. I mean, they have an extension mechanism for a purpose.
Yeah. One other thing too that came up in the PR as a follow-up was there was mention of the confusion of the CRD versus the config map and what's in what and docs and whatnot. I agree that is highly confusing and clearly it confused multiple maintainers as well. So we should probably see if we can improve some of the docs there. I'm sure users are confused as well.
And also, if proxy config CRD will add target ref, that's a question for Kit. And if yes, then what other fields we want to promote, because that's the best way to that's a graduation path for proxy config annotation to CRD.
So the only thing that target ref is going to support initially is a gateway, just because of some of the it's simpler. It gets us where you want to go for ambient in the short term, and there are also some open questions around, like John mentioned, what happens when you've got image with a target ref on a listener. Like that, to be more generic than that would require some at least refactoring or some thought over what's in the resource. So we're going to defer that for a bit, but I do agree that we need to get some more clarity around the two proxy configs, and at the very least, it's a documentation exercise.
I'm not sure I understood why image is a bad thing, because that's probably something that it's useful if you create a gateway to set up policies that use the card. But anyway, I don't think is image in the CRD already, or I thought it's only in the annotation. Anyway,
you can follow up offline about it. It's fine. Yeah, we can. There's one more topic, so let's. You should add the topic for the next meeting, because I think the proxy config conundrum is worth discussing in more detail.
All right, let's move on. So baggage.
Yeah, this is very vague, but I figured we have nothing else on the agenda, so I'd bring it up. We can take this offline though if it gets too hairy. But I was looking a bit at the baggage spec and talking with some of the OpenTelemetry folks, and I'm a bit worried our usage may be somewhat off spec in its current state. It seems like there's kind of two parts. One, the spec was a little bit vague, but the author of it said that it was kind of this way. But I guess baggage is really meant to be a request header only, not a response header. But I believe we are using it as both, because we do exchange metadata in both directions. So that's one concern. And the other is that it's meant kind of as a propagation thing, like trace ID. But we're not really propagating baggage, right? We just use it purely peer-to-peer. And propagating, in fact, would be actually completely broken. Like we don't want to propagate the former peers' metadata, right? Just our own metadata. So I don't know. I wasn't sure if I was just wrong. I want to bring some folks. Yeah, Quad. Thank you. I was looking for your.
Yeah, you're right. That's why we shouldn't. Because I think baggage is meant as a sort of open-ended request ID field, so you can attach things to the incoming request, and they should propagate through the trace. So the way it's okay to use in ambient is because there is no trace. Every connection is its own thing. They are not stitched together. So there's no real propagation problem. But I think what you're saying implies that we should avoid mixing user baggage with our baggage, because they're clearly not the same use case. So if the user supplies baggage on data path, we should try to avoid inserting our baggage into the baggage that the user supplies. And so I think I see that as an outcome of this sort of inconsistency, is that baggage is meant for ambient, but not as a mixed with user traffic.
Yeah, definitely not mixed, but even in ambient, well, so in ambient, it would not be mixed, right? So we have that, well, in HBone rather, I guess not specifically ambient. But it's still kind of, like in theory, it could be propagated in ambient. Even though it's connect tunnels, like there's still an incoming request and an outcoming request. And the spec says that you maybe should consider propagating the baggage. I don't think it says you're required to, because there's some cases where you may not want to for security reasons and whatnot. So which obviously we can just not propagate it, but it could be a concern if we have some other intermediate hops, like some waypoint that's not Istio waypoint maybe. That may not be a big concern. My bigger one was the fact that it seems to be only for request headers. But we'd be using it for response as well, which may be, like, I think it's perfectly fine from a technical standpoint, like it works and does what we need, but it may be a bit off spec, which may give us some issues.
It also have concerns that it doesn't compress well with H2 because, the way the compression algorithm works in H2. The question, I think, is if baggage remains the right thing to do for ambient, because it was intended as a standard protocol, but I think we found alternative solution to metadata service for telemetry, and it may be worth considering if we should use it or not as a standard mechanism, if it's not standard.
Yeah, I mean, even in the proposals, I think with the, I don't know what we call it, metadata discovery or whatever, I believe most of those were still having that as kind of an option and still keeping baggage, right? So this would be a bit more extreme than the proposal has been thus far.
I mean, we should try to extract data from any source, but I wouldn't call it the standard or what we recommend or what we, MDS would be the standard. We have a single way to do the metadata exchange to MDS, and that's it.
I see it more as an upgrade problem now, because if you start shipping baggage as a requirement, we have stuck with that for foreseeable future because of upgrade issues. Because data plane upgradability is very important, and it's we start doing it now. There's no way out. I mean, we've seen it with Istio.
Yeah, I think this is what you're saying as well, but just I don't think we're stuck yet, but we will be stuck soon if we, with whatever decision we make. So it is important to get this right early. I don't know who was Costin or Ben was up next.
No,
Yeah,
I was on the proposing, but I'm now completely against. I think we should drop it.
So I had a question about the baggage. I'm assuming it's sort of following the W3 standard out there, right? So the problem is that there's one baggage header and it's got different keys, right? And we don't want to collide with existing keys that might be there, right? That's basically it.
Not really,
Okay.
because in HBone we put the baggage on the outer connect
So
header.
it doesn't matter, right? Yeah.
If we did this in sidecars, then yeah, that would definitely be a concern.
Okay. Yeah. I don't.
The
I
problem,
don't.
the problem,
Good, sorry.
no, I just want to say initially we thought that it's going to follow the standard, but apparently it doesn't follow the standard, so it's even worse because it's kind of twisting the standard and will confuse users and implementations that are not used.
Well, yeah, that's not good. But I mean, I don't, for like the metadata stuff, like John was saying, I don't really see a way ultimately in which we cannot put anything in the outer baggage for the connect. Like we need to convey information or do something at that point. I don't think we're going to be able to avoid it, but I think maybe we get a little more strict about what we put and where so that it doesn't collide. It might be less of a problem, right? So maybe we give ourselves, say, we use baggage, we use it in the standardized way, and we have maybe one Istio key that contains like a jot or something that has whatever we want, rather than just like sort of spraying a bunch of baggage keys all over everything. Maybe we just have one, and we get strict about how we use it. But I don't think we can like just not use baggage for our outer HBone Connect. I think we will have to make use of that, no matter what.
I think half our baggage usage is perfectly spec compliant and as used as intended. It's just the other half, including in the response header.
And it's not entirely true that we have to send anything. I mean, we have the identity in the certificate, and we have the workload discovery service that gives you exactly the same metadata that we need. You could implement everything with no header at all, relying only on those two elements.
You could, but I tend to think that's going to be harder to do in a way that scales, especially if you get into multi-cluster and federation and stuff. So that's why I don't necessarily want to preclude the use of baggage. I think we will need to use that to convey things during connect. But yeah, that's still just using it as request header only, right? I kind of agree we don't need it as a response header thing.
Well, if you don't have the response part, then you don't have you're missing part of the telemetry, right?
On the response header?
So without the response header, the source telemetry will be missing the destination attributes.
Oh, okay. Gotcha. Okay.
But we could use a different header. I mean, it's not necessary that we have to use baggage. If we don't use it exactly as spec, we should call it X whatever. And then we can put a jot, because a jot in a baggage would be pretty horrific.
Yeah, we could, or we could abuse baggage, or we could see if we can get tweaks to the spec. It's honestly pretty vague. It never says you can't use it as a response header. It just doesn't mention using it as a response header. But the guy that did write it says that it was never intended to be used as a response header. But I don't know if we want to wordsmith the spec to bend it to our needs. Go ahead, Quat.
I think this discussion is actually kind of moot because we never implemented response header baggage handling in Envoy, so I don't think it matters because even if we send it, it's not processed. That was one of the open items to finish baggage, and we did request baggage, but we didn't do response baggage.
Yeah, we might have done NZ tunnel though. I'll have to check. Yeah, I'm not sure we did NZ tunnel either. But I feel like we had the telemetry working, so I'm not sure.
It's depends on workload discovery for response path, so it's sort of non-optional on the response. It's optional on request path.
Oh, that's right. Oh yeah, I forgot about that. Yeah, okay, we do that in Z tunnel as well. Okay, that's why it works.
I mean, workload discovery service is critical to talk with another point, so you already get the metadata. So I don't think we would ever need to put baggage in response.
I mean, the main pushback on the original issue from some folks on Quat's issue about using a metadata service was that if you have a split brain control plane, right?
And we can solve this problem through other ways. I mean, it's since it's not yet implemented and we don't have a good way. And I mean, it's let's say for non-split brain, for normal cases, it works perfectly fine. For the other cases, we need to find a solution.
I would tend to agree. Like, I think we probably, whether it's in baggage, we'll need something in HTTP Connect. I think we'll need to convey some information, some workload metadata as part of that, like as part of the connect request. But I agree that like forcing ourselves to not have response headers in a violation of the spec is good. We can figure out a way around that some other way, I think. Or I would rather, I don't mind that constraint being stated explicitly. Just don't do that. Don't have response headers because it's a violation or response baggage.
But it seems kind of weird to have half of it. Like, we should either do it or not do it, right? Otherwise, you're going to get 3/4 of your metrics. Like, you know.
I guess, but I mean, I don't know. It feels kind of weird having metrics rely on response headers in the first place as a concept anyway. That feels strange to me. There may not be a better way to do that, but that inherently seems weird to me. Like just normal HTTP style approaches, that seems odd. But that may just be me not understanding it fully. But like that's something I think we need to dig into further anyway. The whole metadata and metrics thing is something that needs, I think, more specific looks and a specific design.
You mentioned putting a JOT.
Yeah.
You mentioned putting a JOT. Should we explore this option as alternative and replace baggage? So when use our own header with a JOT, and then we have security and.
I'd be interested in doing that because it does. You're right. It gives us better attestation than we get currently. So I wouldn't be opposed to that at all. Yeah, that's something I would like to explore how we could do that.
So, do we have some consensus that we'll try to drop baggage and for single cluster, single control plane, we use MDS for more user JOTs?
Yeah, I kind of I don't necessarily care if we encode what we need in baggage, we code it in a JOT, but it needs to be something that's propagated with the HBone connect request in some fashion. And as long as we can do that and it's a signed blob of something, I think we're good. Or at least as long as we have an option for that, then I think we're good. That's the main thing. So yeah, I'm not necessarily wedded to doing that in baggage per se, as long as we can do it.
I guess one thing I've been thinking about in general for ambient is keeping things small but expandable in the future. Like, I'd rather have a small, very well defined surface and then add things later if we can, instead of having craziness. You mentioned the compatibility. In my mind, it seems like if we treat baggage as like a fallback mechanism, then we can add that in the future because it doesn't have to be there. It's just extra fallback. Would you agree with that, or am I missing some reason that would be kind of locked in if we remove baggage now?
It depends if we have fallback for every data point component, right? So if it's just us, yes, but if somebody implements HBone and then they don't have a fallback, then it's not easy.
Yeah, good point.
But it's not necessarily true. I mean, if they use WDS or something equivalent, then they have client information, and obviously they have server information. If they don't, we wait for the JOT token, which will be a new spec, and we can ship with just one solution, and then we can add extensions by including the JOT. Maybe we can ship with the JOT as well, but I don't think it prevents us from removing the baggage header.
We can remove it. It just will take time, and we have to make sure that we have alternative working first. Well, right? I mean, it's just a process. We'll have
that's your stuff. What I mean, the WDS. If we finish WDS and works fine, then we don't need baggage, and we don't ship two solutions in first.
WDS is already shipped. It's in its requirement to telemetry in ambient. That's the response path is only using WDS. What we don't have is like on sidecars and making it the first option on request path. I think we need to implement some code to do that. But we need fallback basically. The fallback is what's missing.
Fallback for sidecars basically, and the alternative will be to implement the ambient solution for sidecars as well first, versus having to maintain both in ambient.
We fallback in both places. I think we need fallback in ambient to between baggage in WDS and potentially JOT. Right? We need to select one of them based on some priority. And for sidecars, it also be beneficial to drop the headers that we have. So we need another fallback there. The filter is actually shared. We can just use the same filter. So it's the same implementation work.
Let's talk offline and follow up on this, because I think it's important. And if we decide to do it, we should do it soon.
I have IPR. I just need to finish it. It's already open there.
And also, we're at the top of the hour, and the ambient work group meeting is coming up. So shall we give it a wrap? Okay, sounds like a yes. I'll talk to you all later. Bye, folks.